Frankie Lymon, lead singer of Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, dies from an overdose at the age of 25.
Unfortunately, he had a drug addiction at a very early age, you see.
Frankie leaves no will, but it doesn't take long before three widows claim that they are the rightful heir to the music royalties. They're worth millions.
You're talking about Beatlemania. This was teenager mania.
The song that defines a generation ignites Frankie's career, but ultimately leads to a 30-year fight over its ownership.
I had the law on my side. They did not have the law.
A battle that reveals the tragic life of the first ever teenage superstar. February 27th, 1968. Frankie Lymon dies from an overdose at his grandmother's home in New York City. At the time of his death, Frankie has been married for less than a year to a school teacher he met during his military service in Georgia. Amira Lymon.
I met Frankie at my home. He came in with my sister's boyfriend at the time. I didn't want him to leave, so he didn't leave. I left him sitting on my front porch. He slept in my driveway in a car overnight because I wouldn't let him in the house. Finally, I gave in, I guess.
Just out of the Army at age 25, Frankie is enjoying a peaceful life with his new wife when he accepts a singing gig in New York City.
Frankie wanted me to go to New York with him. At the time, I'm teaching, so I decided I would not go. He left Friday.
It was the last time Amira would see her husband alive.
I was at work. My mother called and asked me to come straight home. Do not run any errands after you get off from work. Come directly home. I called New York, and the priest told me that they had found him in his grandmother's apartment. He had OD'd. My whole world had crumbled at the time I got the news.
The sordid circumstances of Frankie's death are a shock.
I was devastated. I did not know that Frankie. The Frankie I knew was a loving and caring type person. That was the Frankie I knew.
During the 6 months they had been married, Frankie and Amira were living a happy and wholesome life.
Frankie went with me to church on Sunday morning. We would ride the bicycles together around the neighborhood. He appeared to have been extremely happy.
Amira knew little about Frankie's music career and troubled past.
I read the articles in different magazines about his lifestyle. And that was the only thing I knew about him.
10 years prior to his death, at age 13, Frankie becomes famous with the release of the smash hit song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Jimmy Merchant was part of Frankie's vocal group, the Teenagers. When Jimmy learns about Frankie's death, the group's glory days are already far behind them.
I was basically a truck driver through the years, in a limousine and taxi, yellow cab in New York. And I was driving a truck this particular afternoon, and I heard on the news, Frankie Lymon died from an overdose.
Jimmy Merchant first met Frankie Lymon in Washington Heights, New York City in 1955. Merchant had just moved from the Bronx, bringing with him a new style of music, doo-wop.
Doo-wop is actually these whimsical sounds that are imitating horns from the way I saw it. I began making up parts, and I'm hearing what's on the radio, and it all seemed to make sense to me because in those days, you know, we couldn't afford instruments.
Merchant founded the Teenagers with 3 other neighborhood kids: Herman Santiago, Joe Negroni, and Sherman Garnes.
We sang on the street corners to get attention and to exercise how people looked at us, especially girls.
At the time, Frankie Lymon is just another kid from the neighborhood who looks up to the Teenagers.
Frankie was 2 years and a half younger than us. He would follow us around in the neighborhood, and then he would throw his 2 cents in and sing along with us. We kept him in the background.
When they finally let Frankie in the group, they mainly cover existing pop songs.
Everybody was interested in singing harmony to the latest records on the street, that had come out. Do, 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 do. I gotta stay in key.
They later start to write their own material.
I would make up songs, make up background parts, make up bass openings, because everything was happening with the bass openings at that time, do, 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 do. And Herman sang lead, and Joe did some lead, and I did the first tenor, and we were just making up things. I made up a song called Please Be Mine. We started singing that. I made up a song called I Want You to Be My Girl, and I started working on a song called Why Do Fools Fall in Love.
That's when they realize that a professional musician has moved into the neighborhood. They make sure Richard Barrett from the Valentines hears them singing every chance they get.
When we found out that Richard Barrett lived in the neighborhood, we made it our business to be near where he would come.
Barrett hears them sing Why Do Fools Fall in Love.
Richard Barrett was amazed by us, listened to us a lot, and then made an appointment with George Goldner.
George Goldner is a big-shot music producer who's eager to promote the sound of doo-wop.
Herman is singing lead. I'm singing first tenor. Frankie Lymon is singing in the background. Sherman Garnes is singing bass. Joe Negroni, the leader of the group, is singing baritone. And during the audition, Goldner said, "What about you, youngster?" talking to Frankie Lymon, who was in the background. "Can you sing lead?" Frankie jumped right up and said, "What do you want to hear?" And so Frankie started ad-libbing a little bit of Why Do Fools Fall in Love. And the next thing you know, he said, "Hey, look, fellas, Frankie's your new lead. Herman, you're going to sing in the background."
George Goldner signs Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, and they record their first single, Why Do Fools Fall in Love.
We had gone to school that day, Friday, and now we're in a studio working on over 20 takes. He would go, no. Look, Frankie. Put more yourself in it. Put more life. And after 26 takes, we came out with one of the most beloved songs in the history of music. Why Do Fools Fall in Love?
On January 3rd, 1956, Why Do Fools Fall in Love is released on Goldner's independent label.
I'm changing classes, and there's a little white kid with her Quenlin and her bucks, a little white girl. Ooh-wah, 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 ooh-wah. Changing classes. I said, "Oh, no." I ran up to her. She couldn't hardly breathe. Folks, she couldn't breathe. You talking about Beatlemania? This was teenager mania.
Overnight, Why Do Fools Fall in Love is a sensational hit. And so are Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers.
Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers were the first people to be called superstars before the term superstar came out. You think that the Rolling Stones were the guys that wore shabby clothes and in the limousines? Excuse me. It was Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. We would get out of our limos in sneakers and jeans. We were the first.
Legendary radio DJ Jerry Blavat remembers when Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers hit the music scene.
Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers were the first Jackson 5, okay? And if you look at young Michael, he patterned himself after Frankie. Frankie did the splits, Frankie did the dancing, Frankie did all that stuff.
We were a good-looking bunch of 5 guys. I mean, we were so clean-cut. I had a lady tell me that when she saw us, she burst into tears and got her mother and her father to get a group of girls to come to see us.
Black music was not being played on the popular radio stations at that time. The black stations were playing it. I was playing black music at that time. Frankie and George Goldner had one of the first crossover records.
This song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, caused kids worldwide to come together where the message, they all felt the message, black and white.
Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers make their first nationwide appearance on The Frankie Lane Show.
But I can't understand how you could write Why Do Fools Fall in Love? What does a 13-year-old boy know about love?
Well, Mr. Lane, I've been falling in love since I was only 5.
5?
But I've been a fool about it since I was 11.
As the song climbs up the charts and royalty payments start flowing, an important question remains unresolved. Who actually wrote the song?
George Goldner's partner came into the studio. Okay, fellas, we think we got a big hit here. Now tell us, who are the writers of this song? I said we all did. He said, hey, you know, we can't put 5 names on the record. We can only put 2. Just give us 2 names. And Herman Santiago said, Santiago and Lymon. They added Goldner's name. It became Lymon, Santiago, and Goldner under the title of the first pressing of the record.
The group is not concerned about such details. They're too busy getting famous.
The big year for Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers is 1956. The song came out in January, strong. We had about 16 hits. By the time mid-57 came, it was all over. So the group was together approximately 18 months. It was the plan of the management of the company to make Frankie a star as a solo artist. He was very gifted, Frankie. He could play instruments, he could dance, he could sing, he had a style, he had charisma, he was good looking, he knew how to handle an audience, he was multi-talented. So they saw Sammy Davis Jr., they saw Frank Sinatra.
Frankie, unfortunately, his voice had changed. And he recorded some songs, but it was not the sound that kids were familiar with.
They're trying to get Frankie a hit record. But in his private life, he was running the street. He was hooked on drugs.
He couldn't face that reality that he was no longer adored. And, that's one of the sadnesses of being a star at a very early age.
Whenever he would appear in public, his fans were looking for this little high-pitched voice, which, hey, he had grown into a man. He didn't have it. And they were disappointed. They were looking for the little Frankie Lymon with the high voice. And that was no longer there.
It was always hope in my heart that maybe, just maybe, we would come back together again. Groups do it all the time. When Frankie overdosed and I was hearing this on the radio, all hopes that I had died at that moment in my heart. Because once Frankie was gone, I knew that Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers would never exist again.
Myra, Frankie's grandmother, his brothers, and a few friends are present when he is buried at the Lymon family plot in the Bronx.
The next thing on the agenda was go to New York and arrange for his funeral, which I did. And there were quite a few people there who spoke about Frankie's lifestyle and Frankie as a whole.
Frankie has no will. And Myra is the sole beneficiary of his Army life insurance of $10,000. She doesn't think to inquire about Frankie's music or song royalties. She returns to Augusta, Georgia, where she continues to work as a school teacher. Time passes, and the other members of the group don't fare much better than Frankie. Some of them have problems with drugs or alcohol. A few years later, Joe Negroni and Sherman Garnes die. They're both in their early 30s.
Sherman passed from a heart issue. Joe passed from a brain aneurysm.
Jimmy Merchant is struggling to make a living driving a cab in New York City. Why Do Fools has been forgotten and rarely gets airplay. That is, until 1981.
Then Diana Ross came out with Why Do Fools Fall in Love.
When Diana Ross gives a second life to the hit single, the song is everywhere. The copyrights suddenly become very valuable.
There would be a large sum of money, we just didn't know how much.
Singer Frankie Lymon dies at the age of 25 from a drug overdose. He leaves no will and little money to his widow, Amira Lymon. But less than 20 years after his death, music superstar Diana Ross releases a cover version of Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers' single, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? It's a worldwide hit. Amira realizes there may be a lot of money at stake. She hires lawyer Bill McCracken.
If we could establish Amira's ownership of the copyright, that there would be a large sum of money, we just didn't know how much.
Meanwhile, Jimmy Merchant searches through documentation to prove who owns Why Do Fools Fall in Love. Merchant tracks down the song's copyright records at the Library of Congress. He realizes that the group's members were left without any royalties except for Frankie, who has 50%. The other half goes to Goldner, the owner of the record company.
When these kids wanted to record, it was legit for them to go to a record company, all right, and say, I have a song. And there was nothing wrong at that time for them to share, to get on a label. It was common practice back then.
But the paper trail reveals that George Goldner had since sold his share of the writing rights of Why Do Fools Fall in Love. He sold them to a notorious music producer, Morris Levy. Levy was a feared figure in the industry who had known ties to organized crime.
George Goldner had a business transaction with Morris Levy, and Goldner had to pay back him in some way, and Goldner transferred all his rights and his company's songs over to another individual, which was Morris Levy's company. To him, it was all business. All business. You owe me, how you gonna pay me? So Mr. Goldner transferred some valuable belongings that he owned.
Oddly enough, the documents further show that Frankie Lymon also sold his share of the writing credits. It was at a time when Frankie had hit rock bottom. In 1962, Frankie had separated from the Teenagers. His career is plummeting, and he's addicted to heroin.
I knew what his problems were. Everybody in the industry knew that unfortunately he had a drug addiction at a very early age, you see.
We were just wild teenagers, you know. There was alcoholism and there was drugs, and he got out of control. He began associating himself with the wrong crowd. He didn't have people who cared. And we see that today. You know, we see artists today on drugs, in and out of these drug institutions, and, you know, getting in and out of cars with their clothes off, you know, going crazy, hanging out late at night. It's the same thing, nothing has changed.
Most people look at Frankie's life as being very glamorous. I think it was a very sad life. He had missed his childhood life, and he was looking for it in all the wrong places.
Desperate for a fix, Frankie sells his half of the copyright for $1,500. He sells the rights to none other than Morris Levy, the same Morris Levy who bought Goldner's rights.
I did contact the U.S. Copyright Office and had a search done on the song "Why Do Fools Fall in Love," because I knew that was the primary asset in his estate. And they sent back a chain of custody showing where it had been transferred. And I remember that one of the owners was Patricia Records. And I didn't really know what Patricia Records was. I later learned that that was a company that Morris Levy had created.
My attorney, Mr. McCracken, Bill McCracken, had talked to his former manager at the time, in which he told him that there was no royalty. Frankie had sold all of his royalties, so we just let it go.
But all hope is not yet lost. Enter Chuck Rubin, a specialist in music copyright claims.
His company, Artist Rights, they find royalties for artists who are not receiving them, or they've been stolen, misappropriated, taken in some way. And Chuck's familiar with all of the nuances, the ins and outs of the music business and record business.
Rubin, sensing opportunity, contacts the two remaining members of the Teenagers, Jimmy Merchant and Herman Santiago.
Chuck Rubin looked for us and made contact with us, and he told us that he was in the business of going after royalties for groups from the 50s and the 60s who were ripped off and somehow never got any royalty statement. So we took him on.
Studying the paper trail provided by Merchant, Rubin finds that the royalties of Why Do Fools Fall in Love didn't go to the right person. American copyright law has a provision stating that if a copyright holder signs away his rights forever and dies less than 21 years later, the rights revert to the heirs, in this case, the inheritors of Frankie Lymon's estate.
Rubin now asked if there were any family members that were possible estate people that could have his estate. That's what needed to happen. So we eliminated the brothers because Lymon had married. And so we tracked down Lymon's wife.
Chuck Rubin of Artist Rights called and said, if you can prove that you are the legal wife, then you can receive royalties. So we decided to go through with it, and we did.
Amira and her lawyer, Bill McCracken, strike a deal with Rubin. Rubin will pay for the legal fees, but he will keep a certain percentage of the royalties if they win the case against Levy.
When Diana Ross did that version, that generated a cash flow of royalties. And I think that was the motivating force that Mr. Rubin was aware of that. This is his job, this is his thing in life, to locate heirs who are entitled to various royalties.
To avoid a trial, Levy tries to strike a deal with Amira.
I was offered a settlement from Mr. Levy, but we refused it, and we decided to go to court.
Amira's decision to battle Levy will lead to a public airing of Frankie Lymon's sordid and shocking past, and cast doubt on the legality of Amira and Frankie's marriage.
And then these two other women came in claiming to be widows.
The copyrights of Why Do Fools Fall in Love, a song by Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, are worth millions. Amira Lymon, Frankie's widow, claims that she should inherit Frankie's royalties. All she has to do is prove that her marriage is valid. Music producer Morris Levy is the current beneficiary, and he's prepared to fight tooth and nail to keep the copyrights. Chuck Rubin and Amira Lymon bring in the big guns. They hire lawyer Ira Greenberg to lead the case against Morris Levy and his record company. Greenberg estimates the royalties to Why Do Fools Fall in Love are in the millions.
The song was popular again. It would throw off royalties in 5 figures a year, maybe sometimes 6 figures a year, but as a total package, it was worth, and for the past, probably in the nature of 7 figures. And of course, it had a life going into the future as well.
Ira kept saying, hey, don't worry about it. We got a good case here. So we take the case to court. Said, don't worry, you got all the legal rights and everything on your side, so don't worry about it.
But as the trial is about to commence, Morris Levy makes a shocking announcement. Levy tells the court that Amira is not Frankie's legitimate widow.
Mr. Levy was looking for someone who might derail Amira's claim. And then these 2 other women came in claiming to be widows.
Elizabeth Waters and Zola Taylor both testify that they had been married to Frankie Lymon. And extraordinarily, neither had divorced him. Frankie appears to have been married to 3 women simultaneously. If this proves to be true, Amira's marriage to Frankie will be invalid, and so will her claims to Frankie's royalties.
It was definitely good for Levy.
Levy had gone to great lengths to produce the 2 widows, as Jerry Blavat recalls.
I was doing my Sunday night oldie show, and I always played Frankie Lymon, and Morris called me and said, Geeter, Elizabeth Walters, she's in your area, okay? There are monies due to her. Can you do a shout out? Because perhaps she might be listening. So I went on the air that night and I said, why do fools fall in love? Looking for a beautiful young lady by the name of Elizabeth Walters. Where are you, Elizabeth? There's some money coming your way from Frankie's royalties. What about an hour into the show, we have Elizabeth Walters on the phone. And true enough, I went to the phone and she said, Geeter. What? I said, where are you? Well, apparently she had been, I don't know, arrested for something.
It turns out that Elizabeth Waters, the alleged first wife, is in prison for shoplifting. Morris Levy bails her out and brings her to court. Elizabeth accepts a few $1,000s in advance from Levy to pay her legal fees in exchange for contesting Amira Lymon's claims. If she wins, Elizabeth will receive the writing rights. She agrees that Levy can keep the royalties from the past and remain the publisher of Why Do Fools Fall in Love. Levy strikes the same deal with Zola Taylor, Frankie's alleged second wife. In 1987, the trial of the 3 alleged widows begins in the Manhattan Surrogate Court, with Judge Marie Lambert presiding. Zola Taylor, Elizabeth Waters, and Amira Lymon must convince the judge that one of them is Frankie's legitimate widow. Jerry Blavat has personal knowledge of the relationship between Frankie Lymon and Elizabeth Waters.
Next thing I know, I was asked to testify, which I did, and I told him when he came to the record hop at Wagner's in Philadelphia, Elizabeth was with him, okay? And I said, yo, Frank. He said, yeah, man, this is my wife. And that was that. I didn't know about Amira. They said what Amira was, but I said, I don't know who. I only know the last one was when Frankie said, Elizabeth. And that was it.
I was there for the whole case. In surrogate court, of course, Judge Lambert called each one of us to the stand, and each one of us gave our story with Frankie Lymon.
Elizabeth Waters testifies that she married Frankie Lymon in January 1964.
Her testimony was strange, to say the least. She had a number of problems. She had some substance abuse problems. She had worked as a prostitute in New York.
If Frankie was legally married to Elizabeth in 1964, he was not free to marry Amira in 1967. Waters cannot produce a wedding certificate to prove her marriage to Frankie Lymon. But she does produce a document that shocks Amira and the court. It's a birth certificate documenting that she and Frankie had a baby in November 1963. The baby died 2 days later, but the birth certificate states that Frankie Lymon is the father and Elizabeth's husband. Amira's lawyer, Greenberg, argues Frankie and Elizabeth's marriage could not have been valid because Elizabeth herself already had a husband.
The problem was that Ms. Waters, at the time, was still married to a man who was in the service in Germany, and she couldn't get a divorce. And so at the time the ceremony took place, she wasn't free to marry Frankie because she was still married to somebody else.
Zola Taylor is then called to the stand.
Zola Taylor claimed she had married Frankie in Tijuana, Mexico.
Jerry Blavat, who spent months on tour with Zola Taylor and Frankie in the 50s, backs up their marriage.
I met Frankie when I was 17 years of age, and then we went on the road all together. The Everly Brothers, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, Paul Anka. We were a family of rock and roll. We were doing on the road, as you would say, one-nighters. Zola Taylor was the female voice of the Platters, and Zola Taylor sounded almost exactly like Frankie Lymon when she did solo parts. They fell in love. He married her. He married her in Mexico, though, you see.
Frankie told me that he had hit rock bottom and Zola and the Platters were at the top, so he decided that this was a great publicity stunt to say that he and Zola were married.
Zola Taylor testifies that her marriage to Frankie was legitimate and not a tabloid tactic, but she fails to produce a marriage license.
Of course, the Mexican authorities had lost the marriage certificate with Frankie.
Zola gives conflicting testimony, causing objections to be raised. And the presiding judge, Judge Marie Lambert, is making the case difficult for Greenberg.
I have to say it was the most miserable experience of my life. Judge Lambert made that case as difficult to try as could be imagined. She was sustaining objections that weren't even made to questions that seemed perfectly proper, to the point where I couldn't even figure out what it was I was supposed to do to get past the objection.
Sensing that Amira's case is faltering, Elizabeth Waters and Zola Taylor approach her to strike a deal.
They were waiting on the step. Elizabeth called me and said, Amira, why don't we decide to split 3 ways? I said, no, this is my baby, and I'm not going to split it.
During the trial, the 2 other widows tried to get us to agree that I'll get 1/3. And of course we rejected that, but I later learned that Zola and Elizabeth agreed that if one of them won, they would split it 50-50.
Amira feels confident about her case. After all, she's the only widow who has a wedding certificate.
I had the law on my side. They did not have the law, so I was not concerned about their remarks or their testimony. I just knew that, hey, I'm going to win this case because I'm right.
Amira made a good witness. You know, once you see Amira and hear her testify, you'll understand what I'm saying. She comes across as a very soft-spoken, honest person. And you have to remember, too, that she was a school teacher. She taught in one of the elementary schools here in Augusta, and she taught there until she retired. And she was well-liked by everybody.
The court's decision comes as a shock. Judge Lambert rules that Elizabeth Waters is Frankie's legal widow, even though there are no documents to prove it.
I have been amazed at the decisions of judges for 40 years.
Judge Lambert. She either didn't like our position, or she didn't like us, or she did like someone else. And so when the decision came out in favor of Elizabeth Waters, we were both surprised and not surprised. We were surprised because there was not sufficient evidence, but we weren't surprised because the judge had made it clear that we were probably not going to win.
When you put your heart and soul in something and you believe it, you are really disappointed, and we were really disappointed.
Amira and her legal team appealed the decision.
I never thought about the amount of money. I was thinking about the principle.
And as her fight goes on, Frankie's former bandmates enter the fray.
I never made a deal with them.
Frankie Lymon's 3 alleged wives are fighting over the royalties to a $1 million hit, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Against all odds, Elizabeth Waters is found to be the legal widow, but Amira appeals the court's decision. In 1990, the New York Court of Appeal reverses it.
They basically held that there was no competent evidence to establish the validity of Elizabeth Waters' claim, and they reversed it and held that Amira was the lawful widow.
Mr. Ira Greenberg from New York, my entertainment attorney, called and said, yes, Amira, in the appellate court, we won the case.
There is no further appeal. Amira is the legal widow of Frankie Lymon. She is now free to sue Morris Levy for her royalties to Why Do Fools Fall in Love?
We were going to go back to federal court to pursue the lawsuit against what was then the Morris Levy estate, because he had died in the interim, and his companies, and Chuck Rubin negotiated a settlement.
Amira receives her 50% net share, approximately $500,000, plus a percentage of the royalties that Why Do Fools Fall in Love generates in the future.
It was a big relief when I heard it, and I could really just say, really exhale then.
But former band members of the Teenagers want their piece of the pie. Jimmy Merchant says that he and Santiago have been assisting Amira Lymon in her case against Morris Levy from the very beginning.
She came to New York City, sat down with us, with Chuck Rubin.
At the time, Santiago and Merchant had already done legal research into the case and were getting ready to make their own claim. But they decided, says Merchant, to rally behind Amira.
We came to an agreement that we would help her to get her estate because she was she had legal right as Lymon's wife.
Jimmy Merchant alleges that he and Santiago struck a deal with Amira if she won her case.
She was to share the royalties of 3 ways, with Herman, myself, and her.
Shortly after Amira wins and attains the song royalty rights, Jimmy Merchant reminds her of their meeting and her promises.
I called her up and had a conversation with her, and at that time she had amnesia.
I cannot remember, had I met them before? I cannot remember. I really can't.
Merchant and Santiago sue Amira and the estate of Morris Levy, who died in the interim. The band members claim they wrote Why Do Fools Fall in Love, and that they have all the rights to the music royalties.
Can you imagine? When talking to them, I said, you were here in New York. I'm in Georgia. Why haven't you fought this before now? They said, oh, we were afraid. I said, well, now you want to piggyback me? Don't fight me. Fight the person with the money. I don't have anything. Don't go after me. However, they decided to file a lawsuit against me and Mr. Levy.
At the trial, Amira is compelled to join forces with Levy's estate to fight Merchant and Santiago.
One of the elements of the settlement between the Levy estate and his companies on the one hand and Amira Lymon on the other hand was that we would defend the Levy estate against any claim by Merchant and Santiago.
Jimmy Merchant testifies that the writing of Why Do Fools Fall in Love was a collective process.
My answer to who wrote the song was We all did. Frightening words. It became the most frightening answer I ever gave anybody. We all did.
Many witnesses from the old neighborhood take the stand, backing Merchant's version of events.
We basically brought people in to say that they saw us singing this song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, before we went for an audition before George Goldner and ultimately Morris Levy.
Most importantly, when Merchant and Santiago are singing this song in the streets, Frankie Lymon isn't even a part of their group.
Frankie started ad-libbing a little bit of Why Do Fools Fall in Love from what he had heard me create as a ballad. And he gave it a little bit of a twist, all Frankie Lymon himself.
But Amira insists that Frankie wrote the song. She claims that the song was inspired from a teenage crush that he had with an older lady.
He told me that he was in love with this teacher, and she called him a kid and told him that he was too young for her. And that is when he wrote the song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love?
Merchant brings into evidence the original record label and a songwriter's contract that lists Santiago, Lymon, and Goldner as authors of the song Why Do Fools Fall in Love. The judge is convinced by Merchant and Santiago's evidence and testimony. He rules that Merchant, Santiago, and Lymon are the true authors of the song, rejecting any theories of Goldner's involvement.
Judge Buchwald had awarded them $270,000, plus they would have shared on a 50% basis, at least as to the songwriter's income going forward, on the future royalties coming out of Why Do Fools Fall in Love. It would have been a lot of money.
Amira keeps the other half.
I was happy because I was about to get some royalties. When they took Mr. Levy's name off of that 50% and put my name and Herman Santiago's name. Bang! I mean, so we started collecting royalties right away.
But Jimmy's victory will quickly turn sour.
He just said, get out. I don't owe you anything. And before I have you kicked out.
Frankie Lymon's widow, Amira, has won the right to 50% of the royalties from one of the most beloved pop songs of the 50s, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? After a court battle to prove their authorship, Jimmy Merchant and Herman Santiago have also won a 50% share. Morris Levy, a music producer who once owned the copyrights, is now dead. But his company is still trying to make money from Frankie Lymon and the teenagers. In the New York Court of Appeal, Levy's legal team argues that Merchant and Santiago waited too long to claim their share of the song's royalties.
The claim of ownership went back 30 years, and the copyright statute of limitations is 3 years long, and so barring some form of what lawyers call tolling or extension of the statute of limitations, the statute had expired a really long time ago.
But why had Merchant and Santiago waited so long to seek their royalties? Merchant argues that he had approached Levy back in the 80s, but was too intimidated to press his claim.
Well, Herman and I walked into the office, and he just basically said, get out, when we asked him for royalties. He just said, get out. I don't owe you anything. And before I have you kicked out.
Morris Levy had known connections to organized crime, and Merchant feared that if they pushed Levy too far, he would retaliate with physical violence.
People told us in the business that Mr. Levy was not the kind of people to fool with. We had also received some threats.
Jerry Blava doubts that Levy would have reacted in such a harsh way.
Morris Levy didn't do anything that any of the other R&B labels were doing at the time. As a matter of fact, I would have to say that Morris Levy might have been one of the only record guys that really paid the artist. Maybe they didn't get what people think they should have gotten, but they did get royalties. I think that every record company, every guy who owned a record company at one time or another would have a dispute with their artist over royalties. It happens even today. As long as I've known Morris, he was what he owed, bop, 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 and you got paid.
Merchant and Santiago's arguments do not impress the appeal court judge. He rules that the statute of limitations applies. Merchant and Santiago simply filed their copyright claim too late.
They say, yeah. Yes, sir, Mr. Merchant. We do understand that you and your co-writer, Santiago, are the true owners of this music. You've proved that. The big but is that you didn't go after the pocketbook thief within the time allowed.
The copyright and royalty checks return to Amira and to Morris Levy's estate. They are split 50-50. The value remains unknown, but it runs into the millions.
Let's put it like this. Anytime you get an extra check, it changes your life. It changes your livelihood.
She's a good money manager. She doesn't waste it, and she spends it on appropriate items. It's not like you win the lottery and blow it in a week. She has protected and guarded her money and done quite well with it.
I know this is the type settlement that Frankie would have wanted, of course. Like I go back to whenever he finalized his insurance, whenever he told the person in charge of the insurance, give it to her in one lump sum so she can enjoy it, spend it. Of course, I think this is exactly what he would have wanted without any doubt at all.
Merchant and Santiago, co-writers of the song, will never receive a royalty check again.
They wanted their share, which I cannot blame them, but the only thing I felt is they should not have attacked me. I think they should have gone after Mr. Levy, not me.
Jimmy Merchant is now in his 70s. He still performs to pay his mortgage. And he sings the ballad version of Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Finally, Merchant admits that the song's lyrics, after all, did not even come from him, but from a love letter that was given to the group for inspiration.
This gentleman who knew us and saw potential gave us some letters that he said was given to him, and he said, look, you guys are singing the same old songs over and over again in front of my doorway. Take these letters and write a hit record. Write something original.
The original lyricist behind one of rock and roll's first legendary hits is this neighbor's unknown lover. And to this day, her identity remains a mystery.
He didn't say write a hit record, but that's what he was actually doing. Every group has someone who designates the vocal parts and hands out parts and sort of teaches the vocal group how to come together in harmony. And very occasionally that individual also can be a writer and make up songs. We used to call it making up songs, but we were actually writing. And from the moment it was recorded in December of 1955, it had a life of its own. It changed hands. People fought over it. It changed hands again. People fought over it, and it changed hands, and finally 50% of it ended in Levy's estate, and the other 50 in the Lymon estate. It has a life of its own. This, before any wives, before any court cases. It's all about a song.
The teenagers will forever be remembered fondly, even if they're not rewarded financially.
The Great American Royalty ripoff, they did a job on Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. Thank God for God. Without him, I don't know where I'd be today.